Scotland forever!
Time for another raid, but don't worry, it is almost 12 and I've been reading all day, so I'm not going to talk about it. But to sum it up, we battled English again, a lot of money, a lot of bitches, and we crossed the border on the 24th, but King Edward II followed the Scots over the border at the start of August with an army of over 20,000 men. It was clear that a final showdown was imminent. Edward was determined to finish off Scotland, but in the end, Edward's mighty army crossed the border around the beginning of August 1522. They ignored Berwick and headed straight to Lauderdale. Bruce knew they were coming and put a scorched earth policy into operation, making sure there was no crops, no shelter, and no beasts for them to eat. Bruce had pulled his army north of the Forth, basing at Culross in hopes of drawing the rapidly weakening host on, but it seems James had stayed in the border area, lying low in the fastness of Ettrick Forest with a body of men. King Edward had provisioned a fleet of ships, and these were to meet the English at Leith and to, supply the army. And Edward's forces pushed on for Edinburgh, finding nothing to eat along the way. And for 3 days they sat at Edinburgh. Any provision that was carried was long gone, and not being able to enter the Firth of Forth due to contrary winds, and some of the ships had fallen prey to privateers. Realising that the ships were not going to come, King Edward sent outriders in every direction to try and find sheep and cattle. At Tranett in East Lothian, they found one lame cow, and the Earl of Surrey dryly remarked that it was the dearest beef he had ever seen, as it must have cost £1,000 or more. The decision was made to retreat back to England, and the English retreated from battle before fighting a single Scotsman. 300 riders were sent ahead of the English army to secure Melrose Abbey, to sack the building and to possibly find more supplies for the army. But it was not long before James found out about this plan, and without delay he marched his men towards Melrose Abbey, and when the English got there, they were attacked, and Douglas wiped them out. And the survivors of the attack made contact with the rest of the army and told them that the Black Douglas had fallen upon them. The whole force ran like fuck back to England.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Crossing the border on the 2nd of September, King Edward announced that he would remain in England's north, intending to deal with any Scottish incursion. Word had reached that the King Edward was lodged in Revelox Abbey, and the plan was formed to try and capture Edward. Having the English king as a hostage would mean, they would get anything they want, especially full independence. King Edward was shocked when the information came in that the Scots were only 15 miles from him at North Alterton. The direct route through to Revelox went up and over the Hambleton Hills, and Edward stationed forces under the Earl of Richmond. The Scots knew they had to risk a frontal assault on Richmond's forces, as taking the longer route through the hills would let Edward escape. The Scots came from Fosk, but up in the hills, the English had a really defensive spot. Bruce asked which one of his captains should actually lead the attack up the hill, and James stepped forward and said that it should be him. This plan was basically suicidal, but Bruce saw James' brave attempt as a diversionary tactic. Bruce had many Highlanders on this raid, and he knew that it was a particular type of warfare they excelled at, because hills, and that they could use their ability here. James chose a large party of men and made their way forward to the bottom of the hill. Before advancing, James turned around and noticed another group of Scots making their way towards him. It was Randolph. He handed over his own division to another commander and had come to join James's frontal assault with a handful of men because, base. Both groups would join into one and made their way up the incline together, and instantly a hail of arrows and boulders greeted them. Bruce sent his Highlanders up to the cliffs and that bordered the road up the hills. These men climbed quickly to the top of the escarpment, apparently undetected. They immediately launched a charge into the flank of the English forces to lessen the bombardment, battering James and Randolph's detachment. On the top of the hill, carnage ensued. The English hit line began to waver and break. James and his men cleared the top of the escarpment and launched themselves at the English as well as the Highlanders. As soon as resistance began to crumble, Bruce sent Walter Stewart to Revelox Abbey with a body of horses, putting all in black to try and capture the King Edward. The English suffered heavy losses, and big names like Richmond and Henry de Sully, the Butler of France, were captured by James. James also captured 2 high-ranking French knights, but Bruce would not hold them to ransom, and he eventually allowed them to return home. Unfortunately, King Edward was warned just in time, and he managed to escape before being captured. But Walter Stewart was based and went not so fucking easy, and he chased him the whole way back to York, and Edward barely managed to escape. He barely managed to get into the city walls. He was almost captured. This battle became known as the Battle of Byland due to the proximity to Byland Abbey to the fight. Although the Scots had failed in their efforts to capture the king, they had defeated him in England on his own turf. The Scottish took what advantage they could from the situation and the confusion and ravaged Yorkshire, as you do. The devastation, never mind the depopulation that the Scots caused across Northern England in this period, was catastrophic. At Easingwold, 84 tenants are described as unable to pay the farm. The Scots were blamed specifically for the ruin of 57 of these. 13 had been killed at the Battle of Mifton and in 1319, 9 at the Battle of Byland in 1322, and 9 killed by Scots either at Easingwood or at places unspecific. Among these last one, John Baker, a tenant at will of an acre and a half, was burnt to death in his home when the Scots arrived there in 1322. 7 other tenants had been driven from neighbourhood by poverty and destruction caused by Scots. 10 died in poverty, 17 were reduced to beggary, and the holding 17 others are described as simply impoverished, burnt and destroyed.
That's my job. That's my job. That's my job.